I'm not down south. I'm like there.
All right. Today's class will be probably the last one necessary for you to successfully complete Project 3. And with that in mind, I should point out that it is absolutely essential that you integrate the ideas that led up to the Declaration of Independence, whether you trace that back to the European ideas of Luther, John Locke, and Newton, or you want to trace the ideas for the American Declaration of Independence back to the Pequots and the Iroquois Confederacy, but you have to integrate them very clearly into your assignment. And then secondly, you have to figure out how to compare and contrast the idea behind the creation, as Abraham Lincoln said, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal, with the U.S. Constitution, the ideas behind the U.S. Constitution. And today is perfect for that consideration, because today is 420. Yeah, 420. What a beautiful day to consider these ideas. So, with that in mind, how could you use this date to compare the difference between the ideas in the Declaration and the ideas in the Constitution? Yes, you're in a 420 state of mind. No, I'm not saying you're 420. I'm just saying state of mind. You're next to him. He's influencing you by that exchange of chemical, content that he's later going to experience in a spiritual, metaphorical, not a literal way. So what would you say if the test question was, how do you compare the ideas in the Declaration and the ideas in the Constitution using 420 as your model? Good, all right, yes. Now these people want to be tested. You really, and that would be a great question, wouldn't it? How does the idea of America, how are these two ideas of America, one in the Declaration, one in the Constitution, how are they, is this a question I'm going to give you out here? How is that reflected?
Considering it's a group test, I think we should all be group up.
I was sneaking at it. Brian, I know that you must think about these ideas. You haven't been in Humboldt long enough to know what 420 is. All right. Do you have a thought on that subject? No idea. So do you think, so this is my question, do you think the people that are proponents of a day like 420 would reflect somehow an inalienable right? Yeah. And that concept of inalienable rights exists where? The Declaration. In fact, it says, right? We are endowed by our Creator. The same being that created that plant that we're celebrating today. We're endowed by our Creator, not only with the plant, but with what else? Inalienable rights, rights that cannot be separated from us. But then there's this idea behind the U.S. Constitution that there is this new concept that government is not based upon what? The Constitution does not depend, the Declaration says because we're all free, equal, and independent people, government's legitimacy comes from what? What? Who said? Consent, yes. All right, we got a 420er here. All right. So, metaphorically speaking. So you're saying government is based on consent, but the Constitution is not based on that idea of consent. It's based on this new idea. It is like stolen an old idea of being a subject to authority. Subject. Subject to the law of the federal government. And does that obligation to obey federal law rest upon your consent? just start trying to grow some marijuana and find out. What will happen to you if you blow it up, so to speak? Blow up marijuana. Well, if you're in Humboldt County long enough, you find out that sometimes the federal government comes in and they arrest you. Despite the fact that we passed 215s and we voted for Prop 19, the federal government has said, no, your consent doesn't matter. As Jeff Sessions says, there have to be adults in the room, and adults spank children. He didn't say spank children. So, here we have two competing ideas, and you want to think about these two competing ideas in your project and how these two competing ideas manifest in the United States of America. All right, so that's just an introduction to 420. Now, on Tuesday I told you James Madison, who all your history books quote as if he is a prophet of God. They kind of refer to the Founding Fathers in that way too. But anyway, they quote from James Madison's report, 600 pages on notes of the debates of the Federal Constitutional Convention of 1787, as if it's the gospel, of which some people might be a little skeptical of that idea of the gospel. They were published after Madison's death in 1836, when no other delegates were still living, so no one could contradict his report. And it turns out that this investigation found, with Frapp and Gerry notes from other delegates, well, we know they're troublemakers because they kept notes and they weren't supposed to. None came close to telling the full story, and it turns out that Madison's notes were changed and modified over time to spin the story of the Constitution. So that one source that we have about what happened inside is a Ministry of Truth document. It's a construction, so we're back to 1984. We're back to this construction of the American Constitution based upon one set of notes that turns out to perhaps not be fully the truth. Sort of a Donald Trump alternate reality sort of truth. There are my shoes, grounded in reality. All right, so with that in mind, we have to take Madison's notes and we have to look at Madison's notes and compare Madison's notes to the actual structure that emerges from the Constitutional Convention. So when he says that the Founding Fathers, the 55 white men or 54 white men that went to Philadelphia in the summer of 1787 to get naked and wrestle with difficult ideas, when he says they had an overwhelming concern for the protection of wealth, for a contract made by the elite that could be imposed upon the people without their consent, that they wanted a Republican form of government where those people who were considered virtuous could make decisions for those less virtuous people without their consent, where we could prevent the masses from seizing control of the government, and where we could construct a strong central authority that would make a new nation and make it possible to create an empire from sea to shining sea. We have to see if the document reflects that. That's what Madison says in his notes. Now let's look at the document. So number one, this idea of gridlock. If you look at all the other advanced industrial, quote, democracies in the world, they all have universal health care. Universal health care. And that the United States has not, even with Obamacare, come close to the idea of universal health care. Why is that? Why is it when the Republicans want to repeal Obamacare, promise to repeal Obamacare, say they're going to do it the first moment they get in office, and you have a Republican House, Republican Senate, Republican President, and now a Republican Supreme Court, how is it that they couldn't do it? We have to look at the structure that comes out of the Constitution. We have to look at the structure and see how that structure reflects these ideas of the people that met in secret in the summer of 1787. So here's the structure of the United States. As it was written in 1787, as the Constitution was adopted, there's a House and a Senate. This, you know from high school, is called the legislative branch. There's a President, executive branch. There's a Supreme Court judicial branch. Now that is all written in the U.S. Constitution. It's Article 1, 2, and 3. So based upon your Constitution, you do this very quickly. Take out your Constitution and look at the Constitution. The first thing I want you to look at is which branch, according to the Founding Fathers, without knowing anything at all, just having the Constitution in front of you, which branch is the most important branch according to the people meeting in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787? How do you know that? What? Legislative. Now, how do you know the legislative branch is the most important branch of government? It's number 1. All right? It's number 1. What else do we know by looking at number 1 compared to number 2? Number 1 is the longest. It's the longest article. They put all this attention and effort into Article 1. Let's look at Section 8 of Article 1 versus Section 2 of Article 2. Section 8 talks about what? The powers of Congress versus the powers of the President. Let's just for a moment consider that. Powers of Congress: lay and collect taxes, raise an army, call forth the militia, regulate the value of the currency. Powers of the President: ask for opinions in writing, grant reprieves and pardons. And every other power of the President is what? Completely dependent on Congress. He is commander-in-chief when? When an army is called into conflict by the Congress. Congress has the power to declare war. What about the appointment of Supreme Court justices? Only when approved by the Senate. How about members of the President's own cabinet? Only when approved by the Senate. So the President has almost no independent powers. The legislature has an enormous amount of powers. So America operates in this complete illusion of what branch of government is the most powerful branch of government, or intended to be the most powerful branch of government. But that's just go 1, 2, 3 is all I'm pointing out. Most important, most detailed, longest, and most powers. Second most important, second longest, third most important. All right. So then we have a House and a Senate. And we're trying to figure out how the structure of the government conforms to this idea of gridlock. In other words, preventing the government, even when they're all Republicans, well, they're not all, but even when they want to repeal Obamacare, why can't they do it? So check this out. In the House, we got a 2-year term, and the House is elected by who in the original Constitution? We're going to look at Article 1, Section 2, and it tells you that whoever is allowed to vote for the most numerous branch of the state legislature, those people who a state allows to vote for their own state legislature, those are the, quote, people that get to vote for the House. And it turned out that every state, with the exception of one, required that people owned property and were white men in order to vote. So the only people allowed to vote based upon individual states, okay, under the Articles, 2 states allowed women to vote. After the Constitution, no state allowed women to vote. That's progress. By the way, that attitude is actually, they just came out with a study, Harvard Business Review, you might want to look it up, about interruptions of Supreme Court justices. And it turns out that women Supreme Court justices are interrupted 3 times as often as male Supreme Court justices by Supreme Court. So that idea of the Articles of Confederation allowing women to vote, and suddenly, and you know that the influence that the Iroquois Confederacy had, where women were directly involved in the decision-making process. You go to the Articles of Confederation, and it's restricted, but there's a little bit there, and then you go to the Constitution written by a bunch of men, and there's no women there afterwards. So anyway, you have rich white men. Rich white men are the original people. So rich white men get to elect the Congress. Who elects the Senate? State legislature. No people involved. Now here's one. How many people elected the President of the United States? How many people were involved in the election of the President of the United States? In 2016, by the way. No, I'm asking you. 538. How many people live in the United States? Just an estimate. Over 350 million people. Do you remember going to the ballot box? Were you old enough to vote? Were you old enough? Were you old enough? Did you go and vote in some month? You remember there was a presidential election just a few months ago? You're not a 420 person. No, you didn't vote. Or you forgot? You did vote. You didn't vote. You don't remember. Okay, there's a solution for this. All you have to do is take aspirin after you do your 420, and it actually helps your memory. Yeah, that's a fact. A little aspirin after your low carb diet. Yeah. All right. So, do you remember voting? Okay. See, there you go. 420. All right. Took some aspirin. No. Oh. What month did you vote in? November, right? So, do you remember voting for one of the presidential candidates? I don't want to make any presumptions here. Did the person you vote for win? No. Let's explore that. Okay. Did the person you vote for win? Are you sure?
This is the wrong day to ask me that. I'm going with no now.
You're going with no. They didn't win. No, they didn't win. The person you voted for. Did you vote for Jill Stein? No. Did you vote for another woman? Yeah. Okay, fine. I'm not trying to out you, by the way. I'm just trying to get there. Yeah, now she said that the person she voted for did not win in November. Do you think that person in front of you is telling the truth? Just tell her is she telling the truth? That person didn't win. You think she's telling the truth? Alt fact. Alt fact. Is she telling the truth? She said the person she voted for in November did not win.
She won the popular vote.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, here we got a Jill Stein person. That person won what? In November? The popular vote. So what do you know from that since that person she voted for is not the president? What do you know? All of you, what do you know? What? Yes, the popular vote does not elect the president. How many people? How many more people voted for Hillary Clinton in November than voted for Donald Trump? 3 to 4 million more people. 3 to 4 million more people. How many more people voted for Al Gore than George Bush in 2000? 500,000 more. So in less than 20 years, you got the popular vote going for one candidate, and yet the president is a different candidate. So we know that the election in November does not what? No, it matters, but it does not what? It does not elect the president of the United States. As this person from Connecticut, going to Connecticut Public Schools, knows, how many people actually participate in the election of the President of the United States? 538 people. Out of 350 million people, 538 get to vote, and it only takes out of that 350 million, how many people to elect the President? 270 people. 270 people get to choose the President of the United States, despite 4 million more people voting for the person she voted for. So that person did win the popular vote. But they were not elected president because the people do not elect the president. The president then and the president in 2016 is elected by the Electoral College. And then we have the Supreme Court. President, we only got Donald Trump for 4 years. Or maybe 8. Or maybe since he just called the president of Turkey, who just granted himself new constitutional rights to rule, it might be forever. But anyway, so right now we're limited to 8 years of Donald Trump. How about the Supreme Court? How long do they serve? Life. Who chooses Supreme Court justices? The President and the Senate. So let's look at this structure here. Only 1/2 of one branch was intended to be elected by the people. Senate by the state legislature, President by the Electoral College, and Supreme Court by the President and the Senate. What kind of government is that? What is that called? No, it's not totalitarian. It's not a dictatorship.
A monarchy.
Look at the number 538. What does that tell you?
Oligarchy. He's right.
No, it's not a republic.
It's a
Democracy. Certainly not. Certainly not a democracy. What?
Oligarchy.
Very good. Oligarchy. Yes. It is rule by a few. Oligarchy, rule by a few. Look at this, 538 people. And then the president, who's unelected by the people, the Senate, who's unelected by the people, get to choose Supreme Court justices. 5 out of 9 get to determine whether you, as a woman, have the right to choose. And those 5 get to determine whether you have a right to choose are all on the Supreme Court right now. Men who interrupt women 5 times as many times, or 50% more than they interrupt men. But anyway, so we have a Supreme Court chosen by a minority, a president chosen by, what would you call 538 people? And originally, only white men with property could even elect the most numerous branch of the government. So this structure here, all right, it completely conforms to the idea of a contract among the elite. It is perhaps a Republican oligarchy, not a constitutional republic, but a Republican oligarchy, and built into the system is gridlock. By intention, any bill coming out of the House has to pass the Senate. Any bill coming out of the Senate has to pass the House. A bill that comes out of the House can be blocked by the Senate. A bill coming out of the Senate can be blocked by the House. If they pass 2 similar bills, they have to go to a joint committee, and the language that comes out of that joint committee has to be exactly the same, and then it will pass by the House and pass by the Senate. If it is passed by the House and the Senate, then it goes to the President. What can the President do? Veto it. Let's say the President goes along with the Republican House and the Republican Senate, then where can it go? Under Marbury versus Madison. The Supreme Court, with terms for life, can determine that bill is unconstitutional. Gridlock, built into the system. Americans hate it, and they worship the Founding Fathers, and the Founding Fathers wanted a system that made it almost impossible to get anything done. And even when the Republicans have an overwhelming majority in the House, a majority in the Senate, where they can implement the nuclear option, they have a Republican president, now they have a Republican Supreme Court, they can't repeal Obamacare. It's incredible. It's amazing, right? How is that even possible? That you have a system of government where they say they're going to do something, they're all Republicans, they desperately want to do it, and they can't do it. You call that gridlock by design, obviously built into the system. So these things, gridlock, is built into the very structure and nature of the system. Yeah.
How could the Supreme Court just give itself the power?
Yes! Isn't that great?
I mean, is that like illegal or?
Yeah, and who would determine it? It's the most amazing thing ever, right? There's nothing in Article 3 They give, and if you read How Democratic is the American Constitution, right? There's nothing there. There's basically any originalist, textualist, literalist Supreme Court justice completely lives in a realm of doublethink, right? Containing two contradictory ideas in their mind at the same time. We have the power to declare something unconstitutional based upon the literal interpretation of the Constitution, which does not give us the literal power to declare something unconstitutional. Where did it come from? Marbury versus Madison. They gave themselves the power that did not exist and declared something unconstitutional, and based upon that, they're the only body that could declare what they're doing unconstitutional. How is...
I know it's
Yeah, good, great question. That's the kind of thing you... Yes, very good. Excellent. All right, number 2. Yes?
So then, after Marbury versus Madison, when the case of Reynolds versus the United States come up, how did the Supreme Court get away with literally curtailing religious freedoms? Which is the First Amendment.
Because in the Schnick decision, see, you get to pick 10, right? You get to choose all of these cases, and the 5, or the majority on the Supreme Court, get to determine what the Constitution says. I mean, look at the Dred Scott case. Well, we'll get to that in a second. And listen, I'm glad you're... Excellent, great question. And on the first one, you guys are doing awesome. Okay, number 2. They wanted to protect wealth. And so, in Madison's notes, overwhelmingly, there was universal sentiment, according to Madison, that the delegates wanted to come up with a way of both doing 2 things. Representing wealth, you're like, wait, representing wealth? And protecting wealth. Because they thought the virtuous were wealthy. The wealth was evidence of virtue. And they thought the purpose of life was the creation of wealth. They wanted wealth represented in this new document. So when you were in high school, they told you the Founding Fathers wrote into the U.S. Constitution direct representation of wealth. Remember that in high school? Remember that? You remember, right? The U.S. system of government is based upon the direct representation of wealth. You remember that from high school? See why you do this once again in college, over and over and over again. Do you remember? No? You must remember. Okay, how did they do that?
Direct representation
Of wealth. Wait, they didn't... All right, let's check this out. The Declaration of Independence tells us that all men are created equal. Okay, everybody, look up Article 1, Section 2, Paragraph 3. This is in the U.S. Constitution. Article 1, Legislative Branch. Article 1, Section 2, and then count down 3 paragraphs. Do you have it? Article 1, Section 2, Paragraph 3. Yeah, you have it. I know you do. Will you read it for people and just read the first line to begin with?
Representatives of direct...
Okay, representatives, which means representation. There could be no confusion. Straight up. Representation and direct taxes. So we're talking about how do you represent something? Okay, continue. Representation and direct taxes.
Shall be apportioned among some...
Do you know what the word apportion means?
Yes.
What?
So with apportionment, it's how many people to a representative.
Yeah, dividing it up, right? How should we divide up representation in this new government we're constructing behind closed doors in secret? Continue.
Among the several states which may be included within this union, according to their respective numbers, which shall be determined by adding the whole number of 3 persons, including those bound...
Okay, stop. Whole number. 3 people. And those what?
Bound to his service for a term of years.
Indentured servants. Okay, an indentured servant is somebody like a college student who pays for their future by going into student debt for the rest of their life. So if you wanted passage from England or Europe to the United States, oftentimes you'd find a contract and you'd say, I'll work for you for 7 years, pay my passage. That's called a indentured servant, who has a term of servitude. All these people are what kind of people? Whole. These are whole people. They are free people. This is men, women, and children are whole people for the purposes of allocating representation. They are free people, and they're counted, all of them are counted. Number 2.
Excluding Indians not taxed.
Oh, there we have the unpeople. Unpeople? Who are they? Merciless Indian savages? That's from the Declaration of Independence for those of you who haven't read it. Unpeople, not counted, no representation, not included in the government. They are unpeople. Number 3.
3/5 of all other persons.
Oh wait, 3/5 people. Wait, we got whole people, unpeople, and 3/5 people. That's Article 1, Section 2, Paragraph 3. Yes?
So the whole people are represented, and that includes indentured servants?
Yes, indentured servants are whole people.
And the unpeople are,
Native Americans,
and they are also
not counted, not included, no representation.
Okay.
Okay. Question for your test. If somebody chopped off one of my arms and one of my legs, and I counted my appendix as being my head and my arms and my legs, would I be a 3/5 person? Okay, so he's not an kinesiology major because he's not thinking that my identity is my body. Thank you very much, I appreciate that. So, 2 of my arms, keep my legs, leave my head, 3/5 person. What the hell is a 3/5 person? What? A 3/5 person is property. What is property? Wealth. Property is wealth. And what kind of wealth is it? It's only one kind of wealth that is represented in the U.S. Constitution. Only one type of wealth. Wealth in slaves. Now, I want you to think about that for a second. That means that we're directly representing wealth in the U.S. Constitution. For every 30,000 free people, for every 30,000 free people, you get 1 congressman, which means you as an individual free person get 1/30,000th of a congressperson. However, if you own 50,000 slaves, how many congresspeople do you get?
1.
Your own personal congressperson. Now, I was reading this book, The Other Side of the Story, and it said there were 1 million slaves in the United States after 1787, and so I did the math, and I divided 50,000 into 1 million. And it turns out that slaves who cannot vote, who have no say, have no liberty, and have intergenerational servitude that they can never escape from, 50,000 into 1 million. Math major? 20 Congress people. Slave owners were rewarded with 20 Congress people based upon the ownership of people as slaves. So the United States government, the structure of the United States government, not only represents wealth, but it rewards slave owners with political power. It is a unchangeable, non-reformable aspect of the system, written right in the U.S. Constitution, that those that own other people as property will be rewarded with political power. And it is unalterable. You cannot change it because those 20 Congress people can block any changes to the U.S. Constitution. So it is unreformable. So we are rewarding, the United States Constitution is rewarding slave owners with political power. It is making slavery an integral aspect of the U.S. system. And it is getting slave owners what in the Electoral College? 20 extra votes. So not only can the slave owners control the very legislation of the United States, but the slave owners get extra power to elect the President of the United States. And that power persists to this day. So, isn't it fascinating that both the North and the South agreed to representing one form of wealth in the U.S. Constitution and rewarding it with political power, and that one source of wealth was slave ownership. Article 1, Section 2, Paragraph 3 not only tells us that the U.S. Constitution rewarded slave ownership, but it completely contradicts the idea of the Declaration of Independence that all men are created equal. We created a whole class of 1 million people in the United States who were 3/5 of a person. Now let's follow that idea. Dred Scott. When Dred Scott escaped to the North and sued in federal court for his freedom, what did Chief Justice Tanner say? He said African Americans were never intended to be citizens of the United States, and therefore no African American, slave or free, had standing in a federal court of the United States. They were literally 3/5 of a person. So not only do we reward slave owners, but the U.S. Constitution creates the idea reflected in Donald Trump's campaign of one group of people being superior, literally written in the Constitution, being superior to another group of people, written right into the Constitution. An idea of the Constitution is expressed in Article 1, Section 2, Paragraph 2. It does not in there. Now let's look at Article 1, Section 9. It begins with these words, the importation. We know Ben Carson probably was confused by the language here, but what does it say? Did you find it? Article 1, Section 9? What does it say?
It says the immigration or importation of such persons as any of the states shall take proper to admit shall not be prohibited by the Congress prior to the year 1808.
Thanks. What exactly are we talking about in Article 1, Section 9? What do you think we're talking about? What do you think? No idea? No. What are we talking about? Slaves. The importation of people as property is 3/5 of a person who will never have liberty. And it is the only part of the U.S. Constitution that may not be amended. You cannot change the right to import people as property until the year 1808. 20 years to import people. Now I want you to get an idea of what we're talking about. I know that's that's an abstract idea, but here you are living in Africa, and you are in your village, and slave raiders, other Africans, come to your village, and they kidnap you, and they take you to Ghana, on the coast of Africa, and they put you in a prison, and they hold you there. And on the horizon, a boat shows up, and it comes into the Ghanan harbor, and there's a rowboat that comes ashore. And that rowboat takes some of these Africans on the rowboat back to the ship, and then it makes another trip and another trip and another trip. And when these Africans are taken on the ship, they're inspected like livestock. They're inspected for strength and health. And if they pass, they're taken down into the bowels of that boat. And since this is a capitalist enterprise, we want maximum efficiency. So these slaves are taken down to the bowels of the boat, and they are strapped on a platform laying down because that is the most efficient way of transporting them. And 2 feet above their head is another platform where another slave is strapped laying down like a log. And next to them is another slave, and next to them is another slave, and underneath them is another slave, and next to them is another slave. And it's the maximum utilization of space. And there is no fan or air conditioning. And the person above you as the boat leaves shore is becoming sick as they're being tossed on the waves and they throw up. And the person next to you, because of the gruel, has diarrhea, and a woman is on her period. And in these conditions of terror and hell, you are surrounded by filth and dirt. Or she might be a little depressed. Might desire not to eat. So they drag you up on the deck. They shove a funnel they've invented down your throat, and they cram gruel into your stomach to keep you alive against your will. If from these conditions you grow ill, and that illness threatens your value, you are tossed without ceremony into the waves. By the thousands. By the thousands, without name, without record. By the thousands, Africans are tossed into the waves to drown and die. But if you're one of the lucky ones, and you make it all the way to the shores of the United States, you're dragged off the boat and you're put up for auction. And imagine, every slave purchased not only increases the wealth of the slave owner, but is rewarded with political power. And you may be shackled by one of the Georgia men and dragged south. Women may marry and have children. The slave owner, if they find you comely, can rape you anytime they want. They can take you as a mother away from your children and sell you. They can take your children away from you and sell them. They can take your husband away and sell him. We institutionalized in the U.S. Constitution, in Article 1, Section 2, Paragraph 3, and Article 1, Section 9, we institutionalized slavery and we made it an unalterable aspect of the U.S. system. It does not stop there. Article 4, Paragraph 3. No person held to service or labor in one state, under the laws thereof, escaping into another, shall in consequence of any law or regulation therein be discharged from such service or labor, but shall be delivered up on the claim of the party to whom such service or labor may be due. What are we talking about? If you are a slave and you are lucky enough to get on the Underground Railroad and escape, You are never a whole person. You are never a free person in the United States. You are always a piece of property. That is why the Underground Railroad had two places. One was Canada, because the British Crown outlawed slavery. And so a slave in the United States could escape from the place that had declared the idea of America was liberty and equality. The only place that a slave could escape to and be free was a British colony of Canada, or who knows the other path for the Underground Railroad? Mexico! Because Mexico had outlawed slavery when it became an independent nation. And Texas was a war about slavery. All the southern racists wanted slaves in Texas, and it was outlawed in Texas, and so they overthrew the Mexicans and claimed Texas as a slave state. And finally, Article 5. How do we change the Constitution? 2/3 of the House, 2/3 of the Senate, 3/4 of the states. Well, you know you're not going to get 3/4 of the states when most of the states are slave states, but there's even more protection than that. You cannot amend Article 1, Section 9 until the year 1808. And by that time, there's so many slaves in the United States that they're literally breeding them like cattle and selling them. So we built gridlock into the system. We're representing wealth in the system. We're importing power in the form of slaves into the system. Doesn't end there. Because the plantation owners who are building their wealth on the backs of 3/5 of a person slaves want to be able to export their crops, whether cotton or tobacco, into a global market without taxes. And the northern capitalists want to be able to protect their industries from foreign competition. And so they reach a compromise. And that compromise is no taxes can be placed on exports, which will protect the plantation economy, and yet the federal government can protect domestic industries from foreign competition, which protects the new budding capitalist class. Now, according to Madison, they wanted a contract by the elite in a Republican form of government where the people had a limited say in this operation. Now, I'm going to just give you a few quotes from Madison's notes. Who knows if these are doctored or not? They're the only source we have. But according to Madison, overwhelmingly, the delegates believed that there should be a restriction on who was allowed to participate. Elbridge Gerry of Massachusetts, remember Massachusetts is controlled by the bankers? He said, the evils we experience flow from an excess of democracy. That is a direct quote in Madison's notes from Elbridge Gerry of Massachusetts. We have too much democracy. We need to get rid of democracy. The founding fathers are opposed to democracy. Robert Sherman, supporting the exclusion of most people from the government, argued, quote, the people immediately should have as little to do as may be about the government, unquote. Oh my God, what have we got here? The people should have as little to do, whoops, not here. The people should have as little to do as may be about the government of the country. The only branch that allowed anybody besides the elite to vote was the House. The Senate by the state legislature, the President by the Electoral College, and the Supreme Court serving a term for life by the President, unelected by the people, and the Senate, unelected by the people. Oligarchy. John Dickinson stated that property qualifications were essential. Get this. Quote, as a necessary defense against the dangerous influence of the multitudes without property, and without principle, unquote. So remember that idea of wealth, the way in which the government was designed to protect wealth. Wealth is seen as virtue. When people worship Donald Trump like I do every night, I pray the orange-haired man, please, Donald, reward me with a big grant of money. They see him as virtuous. He is virtuous because he's wealthy. You are rewarded by their particular God, the one on Wall Street, that bull. You're rewarded by God with wealth. It is a sign of your hard work and effort. And the founding fathers that wrote the Constitution believed that and stated it explicitly, according to Madison. Maybe you made that stuff up. Charles Pinckney argued that the Senate, quote, was meant to represent the wealth of the country. It ought to be composed of persons of wealth. Might be interesting if you Googled how many millionaires are in the United States Senate. Turns out that Bernie Sanders is one of the poorest United States senators. He's only worth $750,000. He's like a worthless piece of crap. Dianne Feinstein from California, real progressive there, her and her husband are worth millions of dollars, as are most other senators. So Charles Pinckney, when he said this, notice that in Madison's notes, no one said, it's not supposed to represent the wealth of the country. Charles Pinckney said, it was supposed to represent the wealth of the country. Let it be composed of people of wealth. And how will we do this? We won't pay senators, so only rich people can be senators. Fascinating. Well, here's a question for you. If this is stated in Madison's notes, we got all the other ones, right? We got gridlock, representation of wealth, we got importation of slaves, we got the protection of the plantation owner and the capitalist class. If we have this idea that we want the people to have as little to do as maybe with the government of the country, how do we institutionalize that? Or why isn't it specifically written in the Constitution that only rich people can hold office or only rich people can vote? Why isn't that written? Everything else is there. But people, I can't quite hear you. People might revolt. Any other reason? Needed the people. Anything else? Well, according to Madison's notes, and once again, maybe they're doctored, Madison said the reason that they didn't come up, everyone wanted one, he said. It's almost universal. Two things. It was almost universal, they only wanted rich people to vote. But it was universal, they only wanted rich people to hold office. Why didn't they write that into the Constitution? Well, the reason Madison says is because they could come up with what? No definition of wealth that would apply to all people. In the South, you could say, if you have 20 slaves, you can vote. But in the North, slavery wasn't as prevalent. In the South, you would say if you have 160 acres, you can vote. But in the North, a capitalist industry might be on a couple acres of land. In the North, you could say if you have $100 in the bank, you can vote. But in the South, the whole agricultural economy worked on debt. So they had no universal definition, Madison tells us. And because they had no universal definition, they actually came up with a brilliant compromise found in Article 1, Section 2. Now, it sounds a little confusing, but it says the composition and election of members. The House of Representatives shall be composed. Remember, this is the only branch that people vote for anyway. The House of Representatives shall be composed of members chosen every second year by the people of the several states. Well, that sounds like everybody, doesn't it? And the electors, that's voters, in each state shall have the qualifications. So this tells you who is allowed to vote, requisite for electors of the most numerous branch of the state legislature, and hopefully you're shaking your head saying, what the hell does that mean? All right, California has a legislative branch. One side is called the Assembly. It has 80 members. The other side is called the Senate. It has 40 members. This is California. This is not the federal government. This is the legislative branch. Whoever California allows to vote for the most numerous branch of the state legislature, whoever is allowed to vote for this branch, these people get to vote for a congressperson. And like I said, every state, with the exception of Rhode Island, then passed a proper qualification to vote, and they all took away women's rights to vote. Now, two of you made kind of an astute observation. What the hell? How are they going to pass this document when they come out of their secret meeting? How are they going to get away with this? Don't they need the support of the people? Well, actually, the law of the land was the Articles of Confederation. And the law of the land said that all 13 state legislatures must approve any alterations to the Articles of Confederation. Not making laws, like you brought up, but an alteration, like an amendment, that would be approved by all 13 legislatures. And Rhode Island refused to participate. North Carolina walked out. They knew there was no way they were going to get all 13. Then we look at Article 7. And Article 7 tells you that the U.S. Constitution is an illegitimate coup d'etat. It tells you that, straight up. We're not going to follow the law of the land. We're rich white men. We don't need to. We can write our own rules. We can come up with our own method to impose the government without the consent of the people. I mean, what the hell? What is a convention? A convention doesn't even exist in the Articles of Confederation. All changes must be approved by the legislatures. And they go with 9 conventions, and they're like, what the hell is a convention? What do you mean 9? There's 13 states in this Confederacy. What do you mean 9? So first of all, they changed the rules, and they changed the process. And they said, this is the way we're going to overthrow the government of the United States. That's what they did. The Founding Fathers overthrew the government of the United States. And notice what they said. They overthrew it because it was too democratic. They say that. That's their words, or at least it's Madison's words that they put in their mouth. It's too democratic. We want to get rid of democracy and create an oligarchy, reward slave owners with political power, import slaves, and make sure that slaves can never escape their condition. And they pulled it off. They got 9 state conventions to approve the Constitution by having the elections in the fall. And you're like, what? Why the fall? Harvest. 420. What are people doing? Well, in the old days, when there wasn't indoor growth, what do people do in October in Humboldt County? They're harvesting their buds. You can't get them to go to the Mateel. You can't even get them to come out and see Don Carlos. Why Don Carlos is playing now instead of then? Everyone is collecting and drying and trimming their buds. At the time it wasn't buds, it was food. The farmers were overwhelmingly opposed to the Constitution. So the only people that could vote for delegates to go to the convention were Federalists who lived in the cities. But you know what? Resistance. Slow. Building over time. Like the resistance to the WTO that happened in Seattle. Finally emerged. And it emerged in the most pivotal state, which was New York. And in New York, the anti-federalists, who had been active, actually organized a group of delegates opposed to the Constitution. Now, if you are one of those people who went to a public high school, even in Connecticut, you're probably very familiar with something called the Federalist Papers. Did you hear about those? Federalist Papers. They're actually got an opera going on, or a musical that kids went to, one of these famous Federalists. His name's Hamilton, yes. I think I sang one of his songs today. Hamilton. So there were these famous Federalists that wrote these papers. If you go to every American political science textbook in the United States and you turn to the appendix at the back, oh wait, I have one. Appendix. Let's see if I can find. Oh, well, look at that. Appendix D. Yeah. I have looked at every official Ministry of Truth political science book. Every single one has an appendix of Federalist Papers. It's almost like it's the official orthodoxy. What are these Federalist Papers? Anybody know what this?
A series of essays constructed to defend the Constitution.
Sister, that was very succinct.
Yeah, that was Hamilton.
A series. Now check this out. Just what she said. A series of essays. They were letters to the editors of the newspapers of New York. To do what? To defend what?
To defend the New York.
To defend the new. Now you gotta think about this. Let's take apart this. A series of essays to defend. Defend. What does that mean? If you're defending something, what's probably happening? What? Yes. Yes. Wow. Huh. Something's being attacked, and they're writing these letters to defend the Constitution. You're saying, defend from what? I mean, this is the most magnificent document that's ever been created, though no government in the rest of the world, including the one that we established in Iraq, follows what? Our model. Yeah. Like the difference between Iran. Who elects the president of Iran? Who elects the president of Iran? The Iranian people, by a majority vote. There's no electoral college. Every single quote, democracy in the world elects their president by a popular vote. No one follows the United States model. Not even the United States. And you're like, not even. I mean, it's incredible, right? Okay, so who are they writing these letters to defend themselves from?
The public.
Well, this is like the sound of one hand clapping. And for years, that's a same phrase. What's the sound of one hand clapping? So we get the sound of the Federalist, but who are they slapping down? Well, it turns out in the late 1980s, there was this Federalist academic. I mean, he just loved Federalists. By the way, the 5 Republican Supreme Court justices are all members of the Federalist Society. Yeah. So there's this academic who loves the Federalist. He's done all this research for years. And it occurs to him, who are they writing these letters? Who are they defending? The Constitution, who are they defending it from? And he started looking into this. Now, this is amazing to me. For the first time in American history, a collection of the anti-Federalist writings, first time in American history, a collection of anti-Federalist writings were put together in 1987. 200 years. 200 years after the Constitution's the first time there was a collection of anti-federalist writings, and it was put together by this guy Herbert Soring, who was a Federalist scholar. It was like, wait, what were the anti-federalist writing? So of course, I saw this book and I bought it. What were those people saying? Now, as an old white man, more than likely many of you, when you heard me say, oh my God, they were rewarding slave owners with political power. 2017, Dan. Something the matter with you, you're probably senile and doing too much 420. You can't apply, and I bet some of you probably heard this in high school, you can't apply our moral system to what they did back then. Oh no, you can't apply, you can never say our system was somehow immoral because you're applying our standards to their standards. Okay, let's not. Let's look at what the Anti-Federalists said in what year? When is that? What's that? In what month? November 15th, 17th. So 200 years before this book, this is a collection of the Anti-Federalist writings in New York, where the Anti-Federalists actually organized and elected Anti-Federalist delegates to the New York Convention. And all the Federalist papers are a response to the Anti-Federalist writings. You'll never read them in your history class, you'll never read them in a political science book, so let me just give you a little sample. The words are, see if this resonates, the words are representatives in direct taxes, shall be apportioned among the several states which may be included in this union, according to the respective numbers, which shall be determined by adding the whole number of free persons, including those bound to service for a term of years, and excluding Indians not taxed, 3/5 of all other persons. What a strange and unnecessary accumulation of words are here used to conceal from the public eye what might have been expressed in the following concise manner. I will continue, but think about that. Take the U.S. Constitution to your English professor and ask them, should I write like this? Is this the way I should write? And then you'll get this bullshit. Oh, that's the way people wrote back then. Oh, no, they didn't. All you have to do is read the preamble. We the people of the United States. Wait, we the people. Very clear. No, it was actually 55 men meeting in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787. So it's a nice illusion, sort of like, some people are equal and some people are more equal than others. They knew how to write. But the Anti-Federalists were like, wait a second, this is bullshit. This is not clear. And you are attempting to obfuscate the truth. This is not in 2017. This is not an English teacher. These are Anti-Federalists writing in 1787. So let me continue. What a strange and unnecessary accumulation of words are here used to conceal from, exactly your point, from the public eye. They sat down to make sure the public didn't know what the hell was happening. And I bet when you read the Constitution, you're like, what does this mean? When you're reading Article 1, Section 9, you go, what does this mean? When you're reading Article 1, Section 2, Paragraph 3, you go, what does this mean? The Anti-Federalists knew that they were doing it for deceit. It was like the Ministry of Truth turned into a document to take over the country in a coup d'etat. And they continue. What a strange and unnecessary accumulation of words are here used to conceal from the public eye what might have been expressed in the following concise manner. Oh, there's a different way of writing? Fascinating. Representatives are to be proportioned among the states respectively, according to the number of free men and slaves inhabiting them, counting 5 slaves for 3 free men. Now I want you to go back and read Article 1, Section 2, Paragraph 3, and compare it to how the Anti-Federalists clearly laid it out. Article 1, Section 2, Paragraph 3. We got whole people, unpeople, and 3/5 people, and they're saying, there's a lot clearer way to write this. And notice how the clarity reveals that slavery is a fundamental aspect of our system, and yet the word slave never appears in the first 7 articles of the U.S. Constitution. They institutionalized slavery without using the word. The Anti-Federalists said, bullshit. You're deceiving the public. You are the ministry of truth. In a free state, says the celebrated Montesquieu, every man who is supposed to be a free agent ought to be concerned in his own government. Therefore, the legislature should reside in the whole body of the people. Wait a second. That sounds like the Pequot system. That sounds like a system of democracy. And he continues, or the representatives. Wait, that sounds like the Iroquois Confederacy. But it has never been alleged that those who are not free agents, slaves, can upon any rational principle have anything to do in government, either by themselves or others. If they have no share in government, why is the number of members in the assembly to be increased on their account? Is it because in some of the states, a considerable part of the property of the inhabitants consist in a number of their fellow men who are held in bondage? Now listen to these next words. In defiance of every idea of benevolence, justice, and religion, and contrary to all the principles of liberty, which have been publicly avowed in the late glorious Revolution. That's 1787. The Anti-Federalists knew bullshit when they saw it. And that is why their words never show up in the back of your political science textbooks. That is why they don't want you to know that the system of thought of the Founding Fathers was the institutionalization of white supremacy that you saw in slavery, segregation, Jim Crow, mass incarceration. And they saw it 200 years ago. There's a lot of other things that Anti-Federalists said as well. When you concentrate the power in a centralized authority, it will abuse that power. Well, the Anti-Federalists had elected a majority of the delegates to the New York Convention. And the Federalists knew they were going to lose. Despite all their letters and all their bullshit, they knew they were going to lose. So they went to the Anti-Federalists and say, all right, what do you guys want? How can we get you to vote for this Constitution? Now this is what is heartbreaking for me. The Anti-Federalists will call us out for the institutionalization of slavery, did not say, get rid of the institutional power of the slave owner. Instead they said, you have no Bill of Rights. You have no protection of individual liberty. And the contradiction between slavery and the protection of individual liberty did not seem to be an important issue to the Anti-Federalists. But there is no Bill of Rights in the original U.S. Constitution. There's none. And the Federalists, if you read the Federalist Papers, were completely opposed to a Bill of Rights. They did not want one. But the Anti-Federalists said, no, centralized authority will abuse our power, just like what you asked about. They will abuse it. An oligarchy, an authoritarian system, a Republican system will abuse the rights of the people. We need to protect these things. And the Federalists promised, they made a promise, that if the Anti-Federalists voted for the Constitution, they would write a Bill of Rights. The Anti-Federalists believed them. They voted for the Constitution, but then the Federalists did not write a Bill of Rights. Rhode Island and North Carolina did not consent for years. And then this guy, Adams, got elected. Federalist. Well, Adams was president, they passed the Alien and Sedition Act. They started rounding up the thought criminals in the United States that opposed the Federalists. and put him in prison. Anyone who spoke against the government or the president was rounded up because there was no protection of freedom of speech or freedom of religion or freedom of assembly or freedom from unreasonable search and seizure or from due process of the law. And Madison, the guy that wrote the notes on the convention, a Federalist, goes, wait a second. This is exactly what the Anti-Federalist warned us about. We need to pass the Bill of Rights. And so in Congress, Madison pushed for the passage of a Bill of Rights, something they had promised in Anti-Federalists, not delivered. They came up, get this, check this out. They came up with over 600 individual rights that people have. When they wrote the Bill of Rights, there were 12. 10 got approved. Number 9 specifically says, just because it's not listed doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Don't interpret it that way. The Federalist Supreme Court justices always interpret it that way and ignore Amendment 9 to the U.S. Constitution. So because of the Anti-Federalists, because of the Alien and Sedition Act, we ended up with some protection of our individual liberty. No thanks to the Federalists who opposed it, but because of the thought criminals. So freedom in the United States rests upon dissonance. Freedom in the United States rests upon those who oppose power and oppose authority. As the Declaration of Independence said, it is your duty as a citizen to defend our rights. That's your job. That's your responsibility. I will not be in my office today until 3:30 because I'm going to a forum on freedom of speech.